The storm came harder than anyone expected, rolling across the hills like a punishment. By the time the wind reached the edge of Violet Rose Land, the air had turned white with snow, thick enough to swallow sound. Her small ranch, 3 horses, a dozen chickens, and a house more draft than wall, stood quiet, wrapped in the kind of silence that only falls when everything living has tucked itself away. Violet didn't mind the stillness. It had been her companion for 2 years now, ever since her brother left and the last hired help rode off in search of steadier work. People had stopped coming around after the lawsuit, after the whispers. That suited her just fine. She did her chores. She mended fences. She kept her head down and her boots dry. She wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. She rose before the sun that morning, same as always, and wrapped her coat tight against the bite of the wind. The snow had piled halfway up the porch rail, soft and untouched. She took the back path to the barn, head lowered, breath short, bucket swinging from her hand. The horses needed feeding, and the coop would need de-icing again. She didn't notice the prints at first. They'd filled halfway with snow, but something about the shape, the staggered path, human, definitely, made her stop just short of the barn door. The lock was unlatched. That alone raised her heart into her throat. She hadn't unlatched it. No one should have. Her boots crunched through the drift as she pushed the door open. Inside, the smell of hay and damp will hit her first. The lantern on the wall still flickered from last night, casting gold against the wooden slats. The horses were calm, standing quietly, which made what she saw in the far stall all the more strange. At first glance, it looked like someone had dumped an old coat and bedroll near the hayloft ladder. Then the coat moved. A man, curled tight into himself like he was trying to disappear, lay half buried in straw, one hand clutching a small satchel to his chest. His boots were soaked, toes poking out. His face, what little she could see, was gaunt, beard patchy, skin pale and windburned. He hadn't stirred. He looked half dead. Violet's first instinct wasn't fear. It was fury. Someone had trespassed onto her land, broken into her barn, slept in her hay like it was a motel. But as she stepped closer, her breath catching in the cold, she noticed his lips were blue. The kind of blue that doesn't go away on its own. Her anger dulled into something else, confusion, concern, and something she wouldn't name. She knelt down, fingers to his neck. A pulse, weak but present. The man didn't react to her touch, only mumbled something under his breath, something about a train, or a promise, or maybe it was just nonsense. Either way, she couldn't leave him there. She fetched warm water, poured it gently across his lips. He drank, just barely. His eyes flickered open once, gray, distant, and then closed again. She didn't call the sheriff. She should have. Anyone else would have. But something about the man, about the quiet way he lay there like someone used to taking up less space than he needed, made her pause. She dragged an extra blanket over from the tack room, tucked it around him. When she returned to the house, she told herself it was just for the night, just until he was strong enough to leave. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world white and brittle. The stranger was still there. Awake now, sitting upright against the barn wall, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He didn't speak when she entered, just nodded once, slow and unsure, like someone expecting to be yelled at. Violet didn't ask his name. She didn't want stories, not yet. Instead, she handed him a cup of broth she'd warmed and left without saying a word. That silence stretched between them for the rest of the day. He didn't touch anything he hadn't been given. When she checked in later, he had shoveled the barn path without being told. Repaired a broken latch with scrap wire. Like he couldn't sit still unless he was fixing something. That night, she found him asleep on the floor again, even though the hayloft was empty and dry. She didn't wake him, just watched him breathe for a moment longer than she meant to, then turned away. The second morning, she asked his name. He hesitated, then said, "Call me Ellis." No last name. No story. She didn't press. It was easier that way. Safer. But over the next few days, something started to shift. Violet would find a fence post straightened. Firewood chopped and stacked neatly against the porch. Her hens fed before she reached the coop. Ellis never spoke unless spoken to, but he moved through her land like he belonged there, like he was repaying a debt no one had asked him to settle. One evening, he caught her watching him from the window. He didn't wave. Just nodded once, and returned to hammering a loose plank on the barn door. It was the first time in months she didn't feel entirely alone. Then came the letter. She found it inside the satchel he left on the porch one night. Maybe on accident, maybe on purpose. It wasn't sealed, just folded over once, with the corners worn thin from handling. The writing was careful, neat, like someone who had practiced. It wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to Clara. Whoever she was, she hadn't read it. The contents were short, but enough to raise every hair on the back of Violet's neck. He said he was on his way, that he'd arrive with nothing but his hands and the truth, that he hoped she'd forgive him, that he was sorry for everything. And then one line that stuck to Violet like a thorn. If I make it there, maybe I can make it right. She folded the letter and returned it without a word. But that night, she sat on the porch longer than usual, eyes scanning the hills like she expected someone else to arrive. The next day, a car did. Black, shiny, too clean for country roads. It pulled up slow, engine quiet, until it parked just past the gate. A woman stepped out. Boots without mud, gloves tied at the wrists, scarf pinned just so. She didn't knock, just waited, watching the house like she knew someone was inside. Violet didn't answer the door. Didn't need to. She'd seen the way Ellis flinched when she described the car later. Said he had to leave. Said it wasn't safe. Not for him. Not for her. Violet didn't ask why, but something in her chest tightened. The woman returned the next day. And the next. She didn't speak. Just watched. On the fourth day, Ellis was gone. Violet found his blanket folded, satchel missing, the barn swept clean. He hadn't said goodbye, but something told her he'd left not to run, but to protect her. Or maybe he was done running altogether. Either way, the quiet he left behind was louder than any storm. That night, as she walked the fence line, checking the posts he had repaired, she found something wedged beneath one of them. A photograph, faded and water-stained. 3 people, a younger Ellis, a child with laughing eyes, and a woman who looked nothing like the one who had arrived in the black car. On the back, scrawled in the same careful hand, I failed once. I won't fail again. Violet stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at her sleeves, the snow whispering secrets around her boots. Then she turned back toward the house. She wasn't alone anymore. The days after Ellis vanished were heavier than Violet expected. His absence wasn't loud, it was in the small things. The water trough left unfilled. The way the barn creaked more in the wind. The sound of her own breath as she walked from stall to stall, wondering if she'd imagined him. She had thought she was used to being alone. But something about him had folded itself into her routines so seamlessly that she didn't realize how much space he'd taken until it was empty again. She didn't see the black car again. The woman hadn't returned, or maybe she'd gotten what she came for. The letter, the photograph, whatever truth Ellis was trying to escape or fix, was now buried under fresh snow and silence. Violet tried to return to her usual rhythm, but she started sleeping with the porch light on. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night, half expecting footsteps on the path, a knock on the door, or even just the smell of wood smoke from the barn. But there was nothing. Then, 2 weeks later, the sheriff came. It wasn't a social visit. Sheriff Tolliver was a heavy man with a voice like dry gravel. He stood on her porch and tipped his hat, but his eyes weren't warm. "We got a report," he said without preamble, "about someone matching your stranger's description. Said he might have passed through here. You see anyone like that?" Violet didn't answer right away. She looked past the sheriff toward the woods. Her breath misted between them. "He stayed in the barn," she said. "A few days. He left." "Name?" He said Ellis. "Last name?" She hesitated. Didn't give one. Tolliver sighed like he already knew. "There's a warrant out. Not for violence. Nothing like that. But it's serious. Fraud. Theft. Interstate impersonation. Left a woman and child behind upstate. Took money that wasn't his." Violet's heart didn't race. It dropped. Slow and cold. "You sure it's the same man?" she asked. Tolliver squinted. "You sure you didn't know?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. He didn't arrest her. Didn't even warn her. Just left her with a look that said he might be back, depending on how things played out. As his cruiser disappeared down the road, Violet found herself gripping the porch rail like she needed it to keep from falling. She didn't believe all of it. Not yet. But she believed enough to start asking questions she'd avoided. That night, she went to the barn and stood in the stall where he'd first slept. Nothing remained. But when she climbed to the loft, something she hadn't done since the week before, she found a tin tucked under the boards. Inside was a folded map, some bills, and another letter. This one wasn't to Clara. It was to her. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. "If you're reading this, I didn't mean to lie. I just didn't know how to tell the truth without losing your trust. I did take something once. I ran. But I came to your barn because I finally wanted to stop. You gave me a place to breathe. I didn't think I deserved it. That's why I left. I won't forget what you gave me. If I make it back, it'll be with my hands empty. Ellis. She read it 3 times. Then she burned it in the stove. Not because she was angry, but because she didn't want anyone else finding it. For a week, nothing happened. Then she got the call. A woman's voice. Sharp, clipped. The kind of tone that sounded expensive. He used you, the voice said. He does this. Comes in looking lost, makes himself useful, then vanishes with whatever you didn't think to lock up. I'm sorry, Violet said. No, you're not, the woman snapped. Because you probably think he's a good man underneath it all. But I knew him longer. He can't change. Then the line went dead. Violet stood there, receiver in hand, 1,000 thoughts crashing into each other. Who was telling the truth? The woman? The sheriff? Ellis? All of them? The next day, the bank called. Her savings account, what little was left, had been touched. A withdrawal she hadn't made. In a town 2 counties over. The teller described a man in a brown coat, gaunt face, graying at the temples. Violet didn't say anything, just hung up. She sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. The old clock on the wall ticking too loud. A sense of betrayal curled inside her chest, slow and sour. But beneath it, something else stirred. A question. Why take the money and then leave it under the floor? Why write the letter? Why disappear right after the woman came, not before? She didn't know, but she intended to find out. So she packed a bag, left a note on the table, hitched her old truck, and drove north. It wasn't hard to find him. 2 days later, in a small town with a population sign half fallen over, she spotted him through the window of a mechanic's garage. He was sweeping the floor. Same coat, same boots, same expression, focused, quiet, tired. She didn't go inside. She waited. At dusk, he came out the side door and froze when he saw her. He didn't run. She didn't speak. They stood facing each other for a long moment. The cold wind snapping at her coat, the dim garage light casting long shadows. Finally, he spoke. You shouldn't be here. You touched my money. I put it back. Why? He didn't answer. So she asked again. He swallowed. Because I was trying to prove something to someone. That I could be trusted. That I wouldn't take what wasn't mine. I was going to leave it in your name. Then the sheriff showed up, and I knew it would all look wrong. I panicked. Violet didn't blink. Was any of it real? His voice cracked. All of it. She looked at him like she was weighing something invisible. Then come back, she said. His eyes widened. What? I said come back. But this time, you don't stay in the barn. You stay in the house. You eat at my table. You earn the trust you want. He took a step forward. You'd really let me? I'm not doing it for you, she said. I'm doing it for me. Because I want to see what happens when someone finally chooses to stay. He looked like he might cry, then nodded, slow and sure. They left that night. By the time they returned to the ranch, the snow had melted. Spring had begun its quiet work. The land smelled like thawed dirt and new grass. Violet didn't tell anyone he was back. Didn't care what they thought. For 3 days, they worked in silence. On the 4th morning, someone knocked on the door. It was the sheriff. Again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the woman from the car. Her face pale. Her coat soaked through. In her arms was a child, no older than 6. A girl. With Ellis's eyes. Violet stood frozen. Ellis stepped beside her, shoulders stiff, hands clenched. I didn't know, he whispered. The woman didn't speak. Just pushed the child forward and walked back to the car without a word. The girl looked up at Ellis, then at Violet, then said, Is this home? No one answered. Not yet. The girl didn't speak much. She just stood there on the porch, clutching the small cloth bag slung over one shoulder, watching the way Ellis didn't move. Violet watched too. She watched the storm in his eyes, the way his breath caught like someone drowning in silence, and the way his feet didn't move even though the child he hadn't known existed was standing less than 5 feet away. Her name was June, the girl said, as if that explained everything. She was 6, and she liked pancakes and horses and warm blankets that smelled like sunshine. Violet said nothing, only stepped back and let the child inside. Ellis followed a step behind, slow and stiff, like a man walking into judgment. He didn't touch June, not at first. Just watched her curl up in the corner of the couch, thumb in her mouth, eyes darting around the unfamiliar room like she was measuring what could be taken from her next. Violet made tea, gave the child a blanket, said nothing about the woman who had dropped her off and left. Some stories needed time before they could be touched. That night, Violet didn't sleep. She stood by the window watching the bunkhouse light flicker. She could see the silhouette of Ellis pacing, the child sitting cross-legged on the bed. He looked lost in a way she hadn't seen before. Not like a man hiding from the law or from himself. This was something deeper. The kind of loss that comes when a truth you never asked for finds you anyway. She thought about going out there. Thought about telling him he didn't have to carry all of it alone. But she didn't. Not yet. The next morning, the child woke early and padded barefoot across the cold wood floor. She stood in the kitchen doorway, rubbing one eye, and asked if she could help with the eggs. Violet handed her a bowl and watched as the girl cracked them with a practiced hand. Not delicate, but careful, like someone who'd been told more than once not to make a mess. When Ellis came in, he looked like he hadn't slept. His face drawn, eyes rimmed and red, but his shoulders a little straighter. He said her name, June, softly, as if trying the weight of it in his mouth. She looked up from the bowl and nodded once. Then she handed him a spoon. It was a kind of beginning, but it didn't stay quiet for long. 3 days later, the sheriff returned. This time, there was no hat tip, no soft pretense of curiosity. He came with a paper in his hand and the weight of the state behind him. The woman, he said, voice grim, filed charges. Said she gave the child to a man unfit to raise her. Claimed coercion. Said the girl isn't safe here. Ellis said nothing. Violet stepped forward. What does she want? She wants him charged. And the girl back. June, sitting on the steps, didn't move. But Violet saw the way her fingers dug into the railing. Saw the way her lower lip trembled. She left her here, Violet said. Just left. That's not what she told them, the sheriff replied. You have 3 days. He turns himself in. The girl goes into custody. Otherwise, they'll take her by force. Ellis didn't argue. He just sat on the porch that night, staring out at the barn, the mountains, the place that had almost become something like peace. Violet stood behind him, arms crossed. I can run, he said. Take her with me. She deserves better than running, Violet replied. So do you. What do I do? Prove them wrong. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Not to flee. To stay. Violet called in every favor she had left. A teacher who owed her a kindness vouched for June's behavior. A nurse from town wrote a note saying the girl was healthy and safe. The mechanic Ellis had worked for up north sent a letter describing him as honest, hardworking, quiet. The people who had once turned their backs, slowly, cautiously, stepped forward. Even the feed store owner, who hadn't spoken to Violet since the lawsuit, gave them a bag of grain and a muttered, good luck. But the biggest surprise came from June. She had found the old ledger Violet kept in the kitchen. The one filled with numbers, feed costs, and notes scratched in the margins. June added her own. In careful, childish letters, she wrote, This is home. Please let me stay. It wasn't enough for the state, but it was enough for someone else. The morning of the hearing, as they loaded up the truck, a second car pulled into the drive. From it stepped Violet's neighbor, the one who hadn't spoken in over a year, not since her son had gone missing in a similar storm. She walked up the porch, handed Violet a letter, and said, Give this to them. It was a notarized statement. That she'd seen the child left alone. That she'd heard the mother call her a burden. That she believed, beyond doubt, the girl was better off here. They brought it with them to the county building. The courtroom was small. Fluorescent lights. Gray walls. A judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But when Ellis spoke, quietly, simply, something in the room shifted. He didn't deny anything. He admitted to running. To making mistakes. But he also told them about the barn, the snow, the woman who gave him warmth when he had none, and the child who showed up on his doorstep like fate dressed in second-hand shoes. I don't want to be rescued, he said. I just want a chance to stay. It was enough. Barely. The judge didn't grant custody. Not yet. But he denied the removal order. Said there would be a review. Said June could stay, under observation. When they returned to the ranch that evening, Violet didn't wait for the porch. She grabbed Ellis's hand and held it, tight and certain. June ran ahead, laughing, chasing the chickens across the yard like she'd never stopped running. That night, they lit the fireplace. They didn't talk about the future, just sat close, shoulder to shoulder, with the kind of silence that had once been terrifying and now felt like belonging. In the weeks that followed, spring dug deeper. The land warmed. The barn bloomed with life again. June planted a row of wildflowers behind the chicken coop. Violet bought a new chair for the porch. And Ellis built a swing, not just for June, but one strong enough for all three of them. Neighbors stopped by more often. Not all at once. Not easily. But in small ways. A pie. A borrowed tool. A handshake offered instead of a stare. But peace, they had learned, didn't mean stillness. It meant presence. One evening, as the sky burned orange and the wind smelled like pine, Violet stood on the porch, watching Ellis and June try to fix a broken fence post. She smiled, then looked down at the envelope in her hand. It was a letter from the court. The custody hearing had been finalized. She opened it slow, breath held. The ruling was short. Ellis Whitman, it said, had been granted full guardianship, on the condition he remain employed, stay in residence at the listed property, and submit to quarterly welfare checks for a year. Violet looked up. June was laughing. Ellis was wiping sweat from his brow. She didn't call out to them. She just watched. And in that quiet moment, she knew what she had always known. He had arrived in the middle of a storm. Lost. Tired. Hunted. But now? Now he wasn't a stranger asleep in her barn. He was home. And by morning, the choice they made. To stay, to fight, to build something out of wreckage had stunned not just the town, but even the silence itself. Because sometimes, the biggest miracles don't come with thunder. They come with the decision to stay. And stay they did.